Wow.
Yeah. Oh, YouTube is live now? Okay. Oh, good morning. This is SJ Velasquez. I am the Director of Audio Strategy for Buffalo Toronto Public Media. And you're joining us for a special segment called, you're joining us for a special segment this morning during Morning Edition. And we're joined here with Canadian correspondent Dan Karpenchuk. And we're in our office in Toronto. So if you don't know Dan, you have been contributing to Buffalo Toronto Public Media for some time, specifically set to BTPM NPR, which at the time was WBFO.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got started with us?
First of all, good morning,
Good
SJ.
morning.
And it's great to be here, by the way. Yeah, I was approached by Jim Ranney, who was the director of news at one time, many years ago, too many to really want to recall. And he asked me if I could do something for WBFO because he had heard me on NPR. And at the time, I was also working at CBC and in a production capacity, not on air. So I did. I started out to do some work for him. And the first story he wanted me to do was about the opening of Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto. And I said, well, how am I going to do this story? As a journalist, I don't like to do promotional stories and promote a business, right? And he says, well, you know, our audience is really interested. We have a lot of people who travel up to Toronto for holidays. So I did the story, and I looked for the angles that I could make it more of a news story. And afterwards, he told me, well, I see you found the news in it, right?
What was the news in it that you
Well,
found?
the news in it was what it cost, how the animals were brought there, the things behind the scenes that people wouldn't normally hear about.
Right. So when was that? Do you remember?
I would like to say it was about 2015.
So that was that around the time that you started working with us at BTPM?
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of different things happening, both in the Toronto area and the Buffalo area. You've been working with us in our newsroom. So you've seen quite a bit of change, and you've really evolved with us. Do you have any stories that stick out in your mind that are especially memorable?
Yes, I do. There's the Marineland story, which was fairly recent, the monarch butterfly story, the death of bees story that I did. Those are all memorable stories, I think. And the daily news that occurred that people in Buffalo and in the Niagara region on both sides of the border would have been very interested in.
So I want to just apologize also for the beginning when we were just getting started. I was having a little bit of feedback in my ear, so if I sounded a little out of sorts, that's what was going on there. But we're all set now. Everything is good to go. So you have been the voice of the North for BTPM for over a decade now. So you've been with us. And you also contribute to other news outlets, major news outlets, including NPR. As you said, you've contributed to CBC considerably throughout your career. You have, I think you disclosed to me yesterday, you did work in Germany.
I did work
You've
in Germany
contributed to Ireland's media.
for RTE in Ireland. I've been doing RTE for more than 30 years as a contributor to their program called World Report, also to National Native News.
Oh, that's right, which we carry on our airwaves.
Right. And I had from time to time done ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, Radio France International, Radio Netherlands, Radio New Zealand. There have been many. Mutual Radio, Monitor Radio, over my long career.
So for these outlets, do you typically cover Canada, or are you covering the issues that are happening in those respective nations?
No, it's always stories that are happening in Canada,
In Canada.
That they have an interest in.
Yeah, and so we're going to be talking quite a bit about what you have been writing for BTPM as well as for NPR, and the American issues and those cross-national issues that you that we're seeing more and more. Now, are there any particular things that you are going to want to talk about or that we're going to cover in the next 2 hours?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's the one I'm going to throw back to you. Whatever you want to talk about that I feel comfortable with, I will talk about.
Okay. And I'm just trying to think. You told me a really funny story about how you got into journalism. And you said we weren't going to talk about it, but I feel like the people need to know. You've been a journalist since you were 9 years old. Could you tell us about that first job?
Well, it was during the summer. During the summer holidays, kids are often at loose ends during the summer. And when you're a kid in Toronto many years ago, I mean, you're basically on your own. And if you don't have your friends with you every day, you find other things to do. And one of the things I love to read and I love to write. And I got it in my head one day to write a newspaper about our street. And all I had was a portable little typewriter, and I used carbon paper and made 5 copies, right? So I would write about news on the street that I knew was happening. I never sold it. It was not for sale, but it was my first foray into journalism. And it didn't last long. It lasted a couple of weeks. But I think the seed was planted at that time that didn't emerge or grow until many years later.
And you grew up right here. You said to me that you actually grew up in what is downtown Toronto now?
I grew up in downtown Toronto.
So very residential at the time.
Yeah, Queen and Spadina. I lived on Augusta Avenue, which was right between Spadina and Bathurst.
Wow.
And when I went to high school, we walked through Kensington Market. Me and my friends walked through Kensington Market to get to school.
So we're going to talk a lot about how Toronto has changed, how Southern Ontario has changed quite a bit. That's going to come up, I think, time and time again during our conversation. But just to kind of explain what's going on here again, if you're just joining us, we are offering this special segment called Conversations from Canada with Dan Karpenchuk, BTPM's Canadian correspondent. He's been with us for over a decade. We're going to talk about all things Canada, the relationship between Southern Ontario and Western New York. And there is quite a deep and rich relationship, and that's ever growing. And while you'll be able to join us here on BTPM NPR, you can also join the conversation on YouTube, on BTPM's YouTube page. So while you hear some national breaks from NPR, if you want to join the conversation and just hear a lot more about Canada and Dan Karpenchuk's fascinating history, you can join us on YouTube live. So we'll continue that conversation there. But yeah, I think this is going to be a fun conversation. I think we're going to learn a lot about you. We're going to learn a lot about the Canadian and U.S. relationship. And hopefully we can solve all the world's problems together today, Dan.
Well, let's hope so. But I'll not sell the farm on this one just yet.
Not yet. Again, my name is S.J. Velasquez. I'm Director of Audio Strategy here at Buffalo Toronto Public Media.
What is BTPM Plus?
Go on.
It's an evolution of Buffalo Toronto Public Media.
You have to take risks to get reward.
That brings you the best of PBS and the shows everyone is talking about.
Oh my gosh, there they are.
From a small spark, a flame has arisen, not to be extinguished.
Where you can watch your favorite programs live.
Welcome back, sir.
We're glad to be home.
And dig into collections curated just for you.
Something for everyone, if you catch my drift.
And here's the best part. When you stream BTPM Plus, you're not just watching. You're supporting your local public media station. The journalism, the arts, and the storytelling that keeps our community connected.
This is the place that people turn to for stories that matter.
Knowledge is power.
Yep, indeed.
And this is power.
BTPM Plus. Stream smarter, stream local.
Welcome back. I'm S.J. Velasquez, and I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, our Canadian correspondent. We're having a nice little conversation from Canada. We're in the Toronto office. So we're live on BTPM NPR. So if you're joining us on the radio or streaming us, thank you for listening. But also if you're on YouTube, we are live here, and we're going to have some additional content for you. So we'll be talking about more exclusive information and access and Dan's experience. So as I understand it, we're going to be rolling some audio, some of Dan's stories that you can listen to, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk to Dan about those stories. The first one that we're going to play is from your reporting on Marineland.
Right.
And the Marineland story is a fascinating one because for anyone who's grown up in Southern Ontario or Western New York, you know the jingle. Like, we can sing it in our sleep. So
Everyone loves Marineland.
everyone loves Marineland.
Not so much anymore.
No. So with that said, I think we're going to go right over to that clip so you can hear Dan's reporting, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that, I think.
When Canada's Fisheries Minister Joanne Thompson turned down the request to send the 30 belugas to China, she said she could not submit them to a continued life of exploitation and living in captivity for public entertainment.
Holding these marine mammals for entertainment purposes is not in their best interest. We have to do better. And so the decision, and it was a difficult decision, but really at the center of the decision was the acknowledgement that we cannot perpetuate what we know is wrong.
So if the whales are not sent to China, what happens next? Marineland has been a controversial theme park. In the past 6 years, 1 killer whale and 19 belugas have died. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's disappointed that Ottawa denied the permit.
We can look at other areas that will take these whales. You know, we don't have to move all 30 in one shot, a couple here, a couple there, and we want them to survive. And if they don't, well, the federal government has to answer on that one.
And Marineland late last week made the situation more urgent, saying it was in critical financial shape, and unless Ottawa provided financial support, it would have no choice but to euthanize the belugas. In a letter to the fisheries minister, the now-closed amusement park said there is no facility that could house the whales, and a suitable ocean sanctuary does not exist. Professor Andrew Treitz is the director of the University of British Columbia's Marine Mammal Research Unit.
Within Canada, it's no longer possible to keep whales in captivity. And so while historically the Vancouver Aquarium might have been an option, that's not on the table any longer. So in terms of the decision that's been made, there is nowhere within Canada to put them into another facility.
Treitz also says while the whales are exploited for public entertainment, they also provide education so people can connect with marine life.
The other piece is beyond education is research. About marine mammals, and still need to learn about marine mammals, comes from being able to study them up close.
Marineland says caring and maintaining the whales costs about $2 million a month. And since the park closed to the public late last summer, very little money is coming in. Trite says euthanizing the whales should not even be an option.
So really there are only two options if they're to stay within Canada. A palliative care center, but that's going to mean investing even more money into the place, and that's not a good long-term thing to be doing. Another would be to see them go into an open ocean sanctuary of some sort.
The federal government says it's aware of a proposed $20 million whale sanctuary in Nova Scotia, but it is not yet operational. Charles Vinnick is the executive director of the Whale Sanctuary Project.
Well, what we're doing is netting off 100 acres of water space in a leased area of 200 acres of water. So that will be a space more than 100 times larger than the largest facility in any marine park in the world. So it gives them a natural environment. They can swim, they can dive, they can socialize, but it also gives them enough room to move away from animals when they want to.
Vinnick says the project is not fully approved yet, but he's working with community partners and the government to get it moving forward. However, he could offer no timeline of when that would happen. Meanwhile, the fate of 30 beluga whales remains in limbo, and there's no word yet whether the Ontario or the federal governments will pick up the tab for their care. For Buffalo Toronto Public Media, I'm Dan Karpenchuk in Toronto.
Good morning and welcome back. We are here in our Toronto office. I'm SJ Velasquez, Director of Audio Strategy, and I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, BTPM's Canada correspondent. And this is Conversations from Canada. So you just listened to the Marineland story. So I know we couldn't hear it here, but right. You know this story quite well.
I hope so.
Can you explain how you found out about this story? How did this come to you?
Well, it was breaking news right across the country when you have whales that are in danger.
Right.
And we had the fisheries minister come out and say that she would, well, first of all, Marineland, which has been in financial difficulties for some time and has been closed for a while, requested an export permit from Ottawa, because they have to do that, to send 30 belugas to the Chimelong Aquarium in China. But Ottawa refused. The fisheries minister, Joanne Thompson, said no, because she didn't want to perpetuate the use of these animals for entertainment. And in Canada, you're not allowed to keep whales in captivity anymore.
Right.
So there's a problem there. What happens to the whales?
Yeah. So what ended up happening to the whales?
Nothing yet. The latest developments. There was a lot of talk about sending them to a sanctuary in off Nova Scotia, but that sanctuary is not ready yet.
Right.
It's I think it's short of money, and I think there's local opposition to it as well.
Right.
The latest development on the whales was to send them to 4 aquariums in the U.S., and the fisheries minister gave conditional approval pending proper documentation and veterinarians' okays. The last I heard, which was yesterday, they still haven't been. They still haven't gone. They're still in limbo.
So where are the whales? Are they in Niagara Falls?
They're
still at that site of Marineland?
That's right.
Which is vacant. Otherwise, right?
Otherwise, yeah, it's not. But there's being cared for there. Some say it's like a palliative. Well, no. Some say that's what they should happen to them, is they should stay at Marineland in what's being described as palliative care.
Really?
But Marineland says it's costing them $2 million a day or a month, I can't remember which exactly, to care for these whales. That's a lot of money.
So it's Marineland that is responsible for those costs at this point?
Right, and nobody wants to take the responsibility outside of that. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, is trying to pass the buck to the federal government to take responsibility. He says, well, they should be sent out maybe in 2s and 3s if we can't ship them all out. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I know that right now we're on YouTube, but we're going to be heading over live to WBFO, BTPM NPR, in the next few seconds. So we're going to continue this conversation about Marineland just to get everybody, on the same page.
Okay.
Good morning. This is SJ Velasquez, Director of Audio Strategy at BTPM. I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, our Canada correspondent for BTPM NPR. And we're in our Toronto office right now for Conversations from Canada. Now, we're also live on YouTube at this point. So during the breaks on BTPM NPR, you can join us on YouTube, where we're just talking about some additional stories, some other, I guess, special highlights from Dan's career. And we were just talking about Dan's reporting on the 30-plus beluga whales.
30 beluga whales at Marineland.
So we were talking about that story and the significance of Marineland on Western New York and Southern Ontario. Now, I know we only have a short time now. Could you just tell us about the status of that story? You reported quite robustly on it.
Yeah, well, the first story that really broke about Marineland was when the request was made to send them to an aquarium in China. And that was refused because the fisheries minister said she didn't want to perpetuate the use of whales for entertainment, because here in Canada, they're not even allowed to be kept any longer in captivity.
Right.
Now, Marineland has said it is in such dire financial straits that it needs to either get rid of the whales, send them somewhere else, or euthanize them.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine what animal rights activists have been saying.
We'll finish this conversation in just a few minutes, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Are we back on YouTube at this point? All right. Sorry. Santiago was giving me the countdown. I didn't want to cut you off.
That's okay.
Hi, everybody. We're on YouTube right now. We are here talking to Dan Karpenchuk. And we actually see some comments that we're getting on YouTube. And also, I can hear everybody in the back room. So we've got a couple comments. We've got some shout outs for our staff here and for our camera folks. So great job, everybody. It's nice and early. Hang on one second. We're just getting some technical things figured out. There we go. All right. So you'll probably see me jumping back and forth and tapping my ear. That's me telling everybody in the back that I can hear them in my earpiece still. So let's talk a little bit more about Marineland then. So we've got this entity that we all have grown up with. It is part of our identity. We were talking about this yesterday. There's a lot more shared cultural things going on in the U.S. and Canada, especially Western New York and Southern Ontario. I was just laughing, going to A&W on the way here with the crew, and there was a sign on the near the pop machine. It said, pop straws, and I take some pride in knowing that Southern Ontario residents say pop like we do in Buffalo.
Yes, they do.
We have some other shared history, though, as well. We talked a bit about Buffalo and Western New York and Southern Ontario's media history. I know I grew up watching CBC and CTV, and the same goes for Southern Ontario folks who grew up watching WKBW and, watching local PBS on what is now BTPM PBS, formerly known as Channel 17 or WNED.
Right.
So we have quite a bit of that in common. Can you talk a little bit about how your access to Western New York media has shaped you as a media person?
Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Green Jeans, I think was where I would like to start. That was my first introduction to Buffalo programming on television. But there is so much cross-border cultural exchange and information that it's continued. And there were, at the time when I was watching that particular entertainment programming, there were laws in Canada that only so much American content could be seen across the border. But now with live streaming, it's just completely different.
Yeah.
Now it's a free-for-all. How can you stop it? You can't.
Well, it's this, I guess it's almost like this dichotomy. We have access to everything now. So you'd think there would be more of that global crossover, that international sharing of information, but it almost feels like an information overload. Whereas when we had fewer options, when the information was curated for us, when we had cable television or not even that, and you just had your antenna, you had certain options. So it felt like, to me anyway, growing up with Canadian media, it was what was offered. So it was part of that shared identity growing up for us in Western New York. And now I feel like younger generations, they don't have that.
Yeah, younger generations need to have things like fast food. They need their news, they need their information very quickly,
Yeah.
and they don't have a lot of attention. They don't have a big attention span.
Right.
So because of that, I think that's how the media now streams its services to them,
Right.
to cater to them.
Were there any journalists that you can think of, especially in the U.S., that you remember watching or listening to or reading growing up that ended up inspiring your work and your decision to become a journalist yourself?
Peter Jennings.
Peter Jennings?
Of course, he's
really
Canadian, right?
See, now for me, I always I loved Suhana Marchand growing up, and I don't. That doesn't really resonate with a lot of other Americans, but I think people in Buffalo, if you know, you know.
Right.
And I was interviewed by her, and I had a total fangirl moment at one point because she was a journalist who I admired, you know, and she was on my television and she told stories I was interested in, and that I think is a unique shared experience with Canadians. We often hear about the influence of Buffalo on comedians who maybe trained at Second City in Toronto and their access to American television and American comedy. So there's a lot of that shared media experience.
Well, not only the shared media experience, but people in Toronto and in Southern Ontario, if they wanted to go to the U.S., and I'm talking say in the 70s and 80s, they would go to Buffalo because it was the largest big American city that was close. So they could go there and have all the things that they saw advertised
right
on TV. So there was a lot of travel back and forth, and a lot of that was cultural too.
It's funny to think of that because for us in Buffalo, we think of Toronto being the big city, you know. We were driving up yesterday, and one of my colleagues mentioned that he's been to Toronto quite a bit since, you know, starting at this job, but didn't otherwise travel up to Toronto before that. So it's so close but so far away.
Well, Toronto's become much more of a cosmopolitan city than it ever was.
Oh yeah, it has.
It's a major center. It's probably one of the most. People in Montreal and Vancouver will argue with this, but I think it's probably the most vibrant city in Canada.
I'm partial, and I would agree.
Yeah, I'm partial too because
Right.
I come from there. So there have been a lot of changes, but the city has developed so quickly and so in an amazing way. The apartment buildings that are going up, the downtown core is completely different. I mean, when I drive through old neighborhoods that I used to frequent, everything's completely changed.
Wow. I know for anybody who's listening on YouTube and watching on YouTube, I've got a little earpiece in, so I'm getting updates, and they're telling me when we're about to go live on the radio. So you'll hear me kind of cut in and just give Dan some information about that. But the next thing we're going to talk about when we do go over to the radio, we're going to talk about the elections and your reporting on the elections. Right. So just kind of get that in your head, and we'll be listening to that clip too. So that'll be here as well on YouTube, but we'll be on BTPM NPR on the radio. So I think we have about a minute and a half until we do that. You have, we talked a little bit yesterday about our Canadian audience, both for BTPM NPR and just for BTPM in general. Mm-hmm. Canadians make up a huge chunk of our supporters. Our supporters, our listeners, our donors. And something that we often hear from the Canadians in particular is they need the U.S. to be friends to the Canadian audience. And in about 1 minute, can you tell me, what does that mean to be a better friend to our Canadian audience?
I think, well, it's all got to do with politics and what's happening in Washington and the tariffs that have been leveled against Canada. That's created a lot of resentment in Canada. I think first there was anger, okay, then resentment, then anxiety,
yeah,
and now there's a certain amount of resolve.
Yeah.
Among
resolve.
Canadians.
That's what you had said yesterday as well.
And I think when you see the resolve, you see we're going to stand together, we're going to buy Canadian, we're going to support our politicians who are taking on Washington with the tariffs or negotiating with Washington on tariffs.
Great.
So that's very much what's happening.
We're going to talk about that in just a second again. Good morning. This is S.J. Velasquez, and I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, our BTPM Canada correspondent. And you're listening to Conversations from Canada. So this is a special broadcast, a live broadcast during Morning Edition. So we're going to be jumping in now and again to talk about our Canadian coverage on BTPM NPR, as well as Dan's robust history as a journalist, as a Canadian correspondent, for not just BTPM, but for major global organizations talking about Canada and talking about what's going on in Canada and how those issues are impacting the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Canadian elections. You wrote quite a few stories for us and covered this particular topic. It was a pretty vivacious conversation.
It was a very exciting time. It was also unusual in the coverage that I gave because usually I focus on stories that are Southern Ontario and of interest to people in the Niagara region on both sides of the border. But the election was such a big story that everybody in the U.S. would have been interested in it, I hope. Anyway.
Well, we're going to listen to it, I think, in just a few seconds. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how that resonated with the American audience and maybe some of those parallels between what was happening in Canada as well as what we're seeing in the United States in terms of politics. So I think we're going to run that right now. No? We're not going to run that story? Okay, then we'll keep going. So I guess at that point, Dan, tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, I think to cover the election, you have to go back a couple of months to the beginning of the year when Justin Trudeau, the then Prime Minister, announced that he would be resigning at the end of, I think it was the end of March. He asked the Governor General to prorogue Parliament until a new Liberal leader was chosen who would then fight the next election. And he said he would stay on until that happened. In a way, it was the end of an era, the Trudeau era, and I think, in Washington, there's been a lot of talk about the leadership in Washington being able to initiate regime change in other countries, and I think this was a case where it was indirect, but it did occur, and I think Trudeau, who was very much left of center in his policies, had not been as successful as he hoped. And the opposition was all over him. And had there been an election in December of 24 or in January of 25, the Liberals under Trudeau would have been wiped out, and Trudeau would have been finished. But that didn't happen. Out of the blue came Mark Carney, who was an economist, former governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England. And he came along at the right time for the Liberals, and apparently, to most Canadians, he came along at the right time for the country as well. He won the election, not with a majority, but still enough to keep the Liberals in power. And I think, in a way, many Canadians saw him as giving them new hope.
Yeah. So we're going to actually listen to that clip in the next break, so we'll come back to that one. But for now, I wanted to ask you a question. We talked a little bit about this off air, so I'm just hopping around a little bit here, but you cover the binational beat, really, when it comes down to it. You're covering Canada, but this is Canada and U.S. relations. Are there any issues that are surprisingly similar or different that you see between what's going on in the U.S. and Canada?
I think probably one of the most important issues is healthcare.
Right.
We have different systems. In Canada, it's government funded, the healthcare, the OHIP in Ontario. In the U.S., it's not quite as, it's paid for. Right. And a lot of Canadians actually go to the U.S. to have special treatments because they can get it faster.
Right. But I don't think a lot of people know that either. It's a bit surprising.
Yeah, I've got quite a few friends who, and people that I know that have gone to the U.S. for treatments and surgeries that they would have to wait months or even more than a year for in Canada. The only difference is they have to pay for it themselves.
Right. So we're going to continue this conversation on YouTube, and then during our next break, we're going to get in and talk more about that election coverage. So join us on BTPM on our YouTube page, and we'll be back with more Canada Conversations.
For former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, it was a big night. The party didn't do as well as many insiders had hoped, but it was enough. He won his own seat in the city.
What is BTPM Plus?
Go on.
It's an evolution of Buffalo Toronto BTPM Plus. What is BTPM Plus?
Go on.
It's an evolution of Buffalo Toronto public media.
You have to take risks to get reward.
That brings you the best of PBS and the shows everyone is talking about.
Oh my gosh, there they are.
From a small spark, a flame has arisen, not to be extinguished.
Where you can watch your favorite programs live.
Welcome back, sir.
We're glad to be home.
And dig into collections curated just for you.
Something for everyone, if you catch my drift.
And here's the best part. When you stream BTPM Plus, you're not just watching. You're supporting your local public media station. The journalism, the arts, and the storytelling that keeps our community connected.
This is the place that people turn to for stories that matter.
Knowledge is power.
Yep, indeed.
And this is power.
BTPM Plus. Stream smarter, stream local.
Hello, this is SJ Velasquez, and you are joining us for Conversations from Canada with Dan Karpenchuk. Dan Karpenchuk, Torontonian through and through, started as a journalist here at the ripe age of 9 years old with his summer paper. So we're going to kind of continue this conversation, but I know right now we're live on YouTube, and we're actually getting some questions. We had a follow-up question with Brian Knoll. Brian wanted to know how many employees are actually left at Marineland taking care of the whales.
I'm not sure. I think it might be about 16 to 20, but I'm not sure. I think I've heard that somewhere, but I can't be sure about that.
Yeah. We also had a comment from, I can't read the name clearly here, but I'm seeing those ads are iconic, but my God, that place was spooky. I think he's talking about Marineland.
Well, I hope he's talking about Marineland and not about me.
No, not about So I saw a clip, like a YouTube clip, I think maybe, of what Marineland looks like now. Have you seen any?
I haven't been there for a while.
What it looks like now that it's pretty much vacant.
It's like but there are still animals there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's got to be about 16 to 20 people looking after all the animals. I mean, there's more than just whales or other animals. Somebody, like a ghost town, was described to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what it looked like on the clips that I had seen. It is a bit of like a ghost town. So if anybody is listening on YouTube right now and you have any questions, I do have my laptop in front of me and I'm seeing some questions come up. So please feel free to join the conversation if you have any questions for Dan or myself. I hope that they're directed toward Dan because he is the pro here in Canada. I'm just here for a good time, not a long time. So, and you'll be joining us also, or you're welcome to join us on BTPM NPR. So you can tune in on 88.7 FM or on BTPM Listen app. And we'll have some more in-depth conversation during those times. But this time on YouTube, I think, is a fun opportunity to get to know Dan a little bit more and get to know some of the some of the reporting that he's done, not just for us at BTPM NPR, but for NPR National, for National Native News, for CBC. You've had quite an illustrious career in journalism, I would say. I want to go right into the fun stuff for a minute.
Go ahead.
So not only are you a journalist, but you have a second passion.
You were going to save this to the end, but not.
We're gonna come back to it at the end.
That's fine. Yeah,
but tell me about that and the listeners about your role as an actor.
Yeah, that was always something I wanted to do. Something I did throughout my years in school, and after high school, I actually auditioned for Stratford. I didn't get in. And I was crushed, thinking that this would never be, it would never happen for me. But I was always pardon me, I was always involved in theater afterwards, in amateur theater, and then even in Germany when I was there working for the Deutsche Welle, I was involved in English theater. And when I came back from Germany, I was reading the local paper. I lived in Port Perry, and they were holding auditions for Inherit the Wind. And it was a lovely play. It was always one of my favorite. My wife said to me, why don't you go out and attend these auditions? You've always wanted to do this, because she knew me from high school.
Right.
So I did, and I got the part of Henry Drummond, which is one of the leads in Inherit the Wind. And from there, I did more and more and more. And eventually, I got my equity card. And then I was working professionally. And then I got an agent. And once you have an agent, then your opportunities are much greater. And that's what I've been doing, including voiceover, including film and television, and theater.
So we're going to later on talk about one of your more recent roles, especially one that happens to be on PBS Kids. So we're really keeping it in the family here with our public media involvement. So we'll go to that a little bit later on. I know we're shortly going to go back over to BTPM NPR. So at that point, anybody who's joining us on YouTube, we're going to be live on BTPM NPR. We'll be here on YouTube as well. And we're going to continue the conversation about Canadian elections. So we're going to listen to your story, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up from there a little bit and talk about that. So we've got about 15 seconds until we're getting over to BTPM NPR. Good morning. This is S.J. Velasquez, and I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, BTPM NPR's Canadian correspondent. And you're joining us for Conversations from Canada. Now, in our last conversation, Dan, we talked a little bit about the Canada elections and your coverage. We're going to listen to some of your reporting right now, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about the significance of that particular election. And how that really reflects U.S.-Canada relations. So I think we'll be listening to that right about now.
When Canada's Fisheries Minister Joanne Thompson turned down the request to send the 30 belugas to China, she said she could not submit them to a continued life of exploitation and living in captivity for public entertainment.
Holding these marine mammals for entertainment purposes is not in their best interest. We have to do better. And so the decision, and it was a difficult decision, but really at the center of the decision, that we cannot perpetuate what we know is wrong.
So if the whales are not sent to China, what happens next? Marineland has been a controversial theme park. In the past 6 years, 1 killer whale and 19 belugas have died. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's disappointed that Ottawa denied the permit.
We can look at other areas that will take these whales. We don't have to move all 30 in one shot, a couple here, a couple there, and we want them to survive. And if they don't, well, the federal government has to answer on that one.
And Marineland late last week made the situation more urgent, saying it was in critical financial shape, and unless Ottawa provided financial support, it would have no choice but to euthanize the belugas. In a letter to the fisheries minister, the now-closed amusement park said there is no facility that could house the whales, and a suitable ocean sanctuary does not exist. Professor Andrew Treitz is the director of the University of British Columbia's Marine Mammal Research Unit.
Within Canada, it's no longer possible to keep whales in captivity. And so while historically the Vancouver Aquarium might have been an option, that's not on the table any longer. So in terms of the decision that's been made, there is nowhere within Canada to put them into another facility.
Treitz also says while the whales are exploited for public entertainment, they also provide education so people can connect with marine life.
The other piece is beyond education is research. And I think a lot of people overlook the fact that so much of what we know about marine mammals and still need to learn about marine mammals comes from being able to study them up close.
Marineland says caring and maintaining the whales costs about $2 million a month. And since the park closed to the public late last summer, very little money is coming in. Treitz says euthanizing the whales should not even be an option.
So really there are only two options if they're to stay within Canada. One is to turn Marineland into a palliative care center, but that's going to mean investing even more money into the place.
We just listened to the Marineland clip, so there's a little mix-up there. So we did hear that Marineland clip, and we were able to hear about the beluga whales and the issues that are going on there. But we're now going to go into that elections clip, so we can hear your reporting of the Canadian elections.
Okay. For former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, it was a big night. The party didn't do as well as many insiders had hoped, but it was enough. He won his own seat in the city of Ottawa, his first. He thanked the leaders of the other parties, and he especially congratulated his main opponent, Pierre Poilievre. Carney repeated to supporters in Ottawa last night the same message that he had brought throughout the campaign.
As I've been warning for months, America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. But
The Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre won a dramatic increase in the popular vote, the largest since 1988, but still fell short in winning the number of seats needed to cross the finish line. Poilievre himself did not win his own seat in Ottawa-Nepean, but during a speech to supporters last night, he gave no indication he was stepping down.
Now, my message to Canadians. The promise that was made to me and to all of you is that anybody from anywhere could achieve anything, that through hard work, you could get a great life, you could have a nice, affordable home on a safe street. My purpose in politics is and will continue to be to restore that promise.
Poilievre says the change that he fought for will come.
It takes time. It takes work. And that's why we have to learn the lessons of tonight so that we can have an even better result the next time the Canadians decide the future for the country.
It's not clear yet how Poilievre will be able to lead the party without a seat in the House of Commons. The most obvious scenario is that a sitting member will step down so he can run in a by-election. And for the smaller New Democratic Party, the night was a disaster, losing official status by ending up with less than 12 seats, and the loss of its own leader's seat in Burnaby Central in British Columbia. Fighting back tears, leader Jasmeet Singh told supporters what many had expected.
Tonight, I've informed our party leader that I'll be stepping down as party leader as soon as an interim leader can be appointed. Now, I could not have done this incredible job. I couldn't have done it without the incredible support of my wife, Kidin.
The separatist Bloc Québécois was decimated, taking less than a couple of dozen seats of the 78 in Quebec. And the Greens held on to one of the 2 seats they had before the election was called. For Buffalo Toronto Public Media, I'm Dan Karpenchuk in Toronto.
So we're back in the studio with Dan Karpenchuk. Dan, you reported quite a bit on the Canadian election, so we know obviously Carney won. But in your reports, you do describe Carney's very strong warning that America wants our land, our resources, our water. And this prompted an interesting and super Canadian response, the elbows up movement and that catchphrase. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and just why it's so particularly Canadian?
Well, it's a very sort of aggressive defensive position. From hockey, Carney is a hockey player. Hockey is Canada's national sport. And I think that resonated so much with Canadians, the idea of elbows up and let's defend Canadian sovereignty, let's defend Canadian industry, let's defend Canadian labor, let's defend Canada. And Carney was the person who brought that right to the fore.
And that sort of elbows up mentality, we're still seeing that in Canada. We're seeing that in small ways and in large ways. We're seeing Canadians really promoting to buy Canadian. We're seeing a drop in tourism to the United States. We're going to talk a bit about that later on with one of your other stories. But can you talk about what that means and how elbows up is being executed in real life?
Well, one of the most important things, and like you said, we'll talk about that later. But the number of Canadians traveling south for holidays and just for shopping is completely dropped. It's dropped. At one point, it was down 35% of people traveling by car across the border. People are now opting to travel in Canada.
Right.
They're spending their money in Canada, buying Canadian-made products rather than products from the U.S. Even the governments, the federal government, the provincial government, their procurement policies are now such that they will buy Canadian on tenders for government work.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere, and how much it's hurting the U.S. is hard to say.
I wondered about that too.
Border states probably are being hurt more than others.
I think we're feeling it in Buffalo.
Alcohol, that's the biggest one.
Right.
For instance, Doug Ford has taken all American booze off the shelf. Now, some provinces are reintroducing them, but with the money going to charities, right? Like food banks.
We're going to continue this conversation over on YouTube. So if you're listening to us on BTPM NPR right now, you can jump over to the BTPM YouTube channel now and listen to this conversation. And we'll be back with more from Dan in a moment. All right. Awesome. So I think we're on YouTube now. Hi, everybody on YouTube. We are joined here by Dan Karpenchuk. I'm S.J. Velasquez, and we talked a moment ago about Canadian elections and the elbows up movement. And you're going to sense some themes throughout this conversation and what Canadians are doing right now to really be proactive, but also defensive and really just surviving, honestly. Like there's a sense of survival, and you used a really good word earlier, I think, to describe it. I can't remember what it was.
Resolve?
Resolve. The resolve that Canadians are showing right now, the unification of the country. It's.
I think what's been happening in Washington has done more to unite Canadians than any Canadian politician has done in decades.
How so? What kind of unification are you seeing?
Well, people are just their whole idea of buying Canadian now instead of buying American products is probably the most significant, and staying home instead of traveling to the U.S. They're still vacationing. They're going to Europe. They're going to Portugal and Spain. They're going to other countries, and they're spending a lot more money in Canada.
Right.
Even some U.S. states, especially border states and states that have been, like California, for instance, they've been offering to take Canadian dollar at par. Mm-hmm. They've had incentives for Canadian travelers to come on vacation, but it's not working.
No, I saw that in one of your stories that the at par, it's not enough. It's not enough of a reason to not support Canada when you can.
Canadians have been feeling so under siege in the last year that this is the only way they know to protect themselves and to protect their country.
Are there any particular items that are hard to find in Canada or that are truly exclusively coming from the United States? Are there any items like that that are...
American alcohol. California wines have dried up.
Yeah.
Kentucky bourbon. No, in Ontario, for instance, these things have been taken off the shelves.
But Southern Ontario has quite a healthy wine industry. Is it still...
They're booming because of this.
Really? I wondered about that too. So are we seeing, when you say booming, do you have any figures or roundabout idea of what is happening to the Canadian wine industry?
I don't, not right now, but I do plan to go to the Niagara region to find out. Mm-hmm. That's one of the stories that's on my to-do list.
That's on your to-do list? You've heard it here first. If you want to know about Southern Ontario wines and the booming Canadian wine industry.
And like a good politician, I won't give you a timeline on that. It will be in the future.
I suspect that BTPM NPR managing editor Michael Mroziak is probably listening or watching right now. Michael, you could put it on the list. Dan's going to be talking about wine. So let's see. We have got some comments on YouTube. Let me just take a little read here and see if we've had any updates. And again, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can join the conversation and ask questions. I will awkwardly bend over here and try to get my mouse and see if you've asked anything. Looks like... Let's see. Looks like we're mostly just getting nice things from people saying that they woke up early to watch this before work. Lots of shout outs to our crew here and our director and our camera folks. So yes, they are doing a phenomenal job. So we'll come back. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment in our live YouTube stream here. If you have any questions for Dan, particularly about his role as a reporter, as an actor, and about his specialized area of reporting, which is that binational Canadian-U.S. conversation. Let me see what other kind of questions we have here. Now, one thing that has come up, speaking of that travel into U.S. and Canada, you've reported on the impact of facial biometrics and new security measures at the border. Do you think these technological hurdles are bigger, like a bigger deterrent to travel than the actual economic costs?
I think they're bigger in people's minds.
You think so?
Than they actually are, because it's been happening everywhere already, both in Canada and in the U.S. And it's just a matter of time before it becomes the norm. But right now, I think because of the feelings of resentment and the feelings of being forced to do something they wouldn't normally have to do in a democratic country, people have their backs up. A lot of Canadians have their backs up, and they're resentful of this. And I can understand why, given the tariffs and the talk of sovereignty.
We see it in the tariffs. We see it in just the political conversations that are going on, and we see it in other practical ways as well. I know you've reported on the Gordie Howe Bridge and that controversy that's happening. So for anybody who's unaware, the Gordie Howe Bridge connects Michigan and Southern Ontario, correct? Is it near Detroit?
That's right.
So there's been quite a lot of conversation and controversy about that. Can you explain that issue a little bit more and talk about what that signifies?
And false information too.
Right.
The idea that it was taking away jobs from Americans to build that bridge is not true. The idea that the U.S. won't benefit is not true. American labor, American materials went into the building of that bridge. The toll booths that are going to be set up and Canada financed the entire thing.
Right, that's the thing.
We paid for the entire thing, but it's jointly owned between the Canadian government and the state of Michigan. And to pay back that money, Canada is being allowed to set up toll booths until that money is repaid. When that happens, the toll booths will remain, but the money will be split evenly between Michigan and Canada. It doesn't
seem
make
like
sense.
A very fair setup, but the conversation around it, as you have indicated, has been confusing.
Yes.
So it seems like Canada is paying for it. They're not getting all of the money out of it, but there's this conversation like America is still owed something more.
Right. I feel that what's being said from Washington is the omission of what's really happening.
Yeah.
Right? And that there's another reason why Canadians are resentful. They know that they've paid for this thing.
I know, yeah. So we're going to go back in just a moment to BTPM NPR. And at that point, I think we're just going to be, so it's top of the hour. It'll be the 9 o'clock return. So for anybody here on YouTube, you're kind of getting a little bit of this behind the scenes insight. So when we go back to BTPM NPR, it's about 1 minute out. We'll be just kind of returning to the top of the hour, talking about what's going on. So reset everything. And then during NPR programming, when we return to NPR National, we're going to listen to your story about the monarch butterflies. So we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the monarch butterflies and maybe wildlife as we get into that. Just kind of talk about that. 30 seconds? Okay. Does that sound like a good idea? Is there something else that you'd rather talk about for this?
No, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Unless you want to, yeah.
We can always pivot too from there.
We also have the story about Americans not traveling south, right?
And that one's going to be on NPR.
Okay.
BTPM NPR.
I'm going to take another drink of water.
Okay, we're 10 seconds out. Good morning. This is S.J. Velasquez, Director of Audio Strategy at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, and I'm joined here by Dan Karpenchuk, BTPM NPR's Canada correspondent. So we've been having some conversations here on BTPM NPR, as well as on Buffalo Toronto Public Media's YouTube channel. So if you'd like to hear more about Dan's experience in journalism, the Canadian beats, and all of the stories that he's been working on, you can join us over on YouTube for a more in-depth conversation. So in a little while on YouTube, we're going to speak a little about a story that you did about monarch butterflies.
Right.
So this veers quite a bit from the traditional reporting you do about major news and politics happening in Canada, the global impact on what's happening in Canada. But it's not that unusual for you to actually talk about wildlife. You have quite a few stories. You've talked about monarch migration. You've talked about bees. And we were speaking a bit earlier about the significance of wildlife at the border. And could you talk a little bit about why wildlife interests you?
Well, yeah. They don't respect borders.
No, they don't.
And too much of what's happening now, we see the extinction of species. And I think that may be happening to the monarchs as well. Not right away, but I think eventually it will happen. And it's such a binational story and such a people story, not just an animal story or a butterfly story, but the monarchs travel across Lake Ontario. They have routes that they take through the U.S.
Right.
down to Mexico where they overwinter.
Yeah.
And it's, researchers have been following this story for years, tracking the monarchs and what's happening to them and watching their numbers decline from various reasons, climate change, weather, viruses, things like that. And it's such a story that crosses both borders where there's so much interest in what happens to these monarchs.
And I think that's pretty evident when you travel between Buffalo and Toronto, for example. You cross the border, but the trees are the same. The wildlife is the same. Maybe the color of the squirrels might differ a little bit depending on the region that you're in. But as you said, there is no border for the wildlife and just for a lot of these natural elements. So it's the shared ecosystem that crosses the border. So kind of keeping to that nature topic, you did some really great reporting on the water health crisis, especially among the First Nations people.
Yes.
Could we talk a little bit about that? And I just want to let people know we're going to be listening to that monarch butterfly story exclusively over on the YouTube channel in just a few minutes. So again, just could you tell us a little bit about the water crisis and your reporting on that topic?
Water has been a big issue among First Nations communities, especially remote communities, right across the country. And the latest one has been in Saskatchewan, which is in northern Ontario near the Manitoba border. The water treatment plant broke down, and the water was contaminated. People were getting sick.
Right.
So they flew out a large number of the residents. I think about 1,600 or so were taken to other communities, including Niagara Falls.
Right, just across the border from our offices, truly.
Now, I don't know what the status of this story is this morning or today, but I know they've been there for quite a while.
Yeah.
And, they've been displaced from their homes. And it's an issue that strikes at the heart of some of the complaints that First Nations people have against the Canadian government, is that there's not enough attention is paid to what their needs are.
Right.
Right. And I think Kashechewan is a good example of that, and the fact that these people are in Niagara Falls wanting to go back to their homes but can't.
And such a story like this one, it's not just a story about access, it's not just a story about water. It truly is a story about critical human rights. So when you're telling a story like this for a disenfranchised community, how do you make sure that you draw that same attention to this story as you do more bigger stories, political, splashier stories? How do you make sure that these stories get that same amount of volume?
I think you have to talk to the people themselves and either hear in radio or see in television the suffering that they go through in not being able to be in their homes, and their feeling of being disenfranchised.
Right.
I think that's probably the most striking thing about it, and you've got to tell it from the point of view of the people involved, the people who are suffering from this. You can get officials to comment on how well we're doing in repairing it, the government on how much money is being spent to upgrade facilities across the country in First Nations communities, but until you actually talk to the people and see their suffering, you're not going to get the real picture of what's happening.
And it's interesting, we were talking yesterday a bit about that First Nations coverage and how so many of those issues that are affecting the First Nations people in Canada, we're having those same conversations in the United States. Like these are universal conversations and experiences a lot of times that are impacting Indigenous communities worldwide. But there's such a shared heritage among Canadian and the U.S. Indigenous people. So this is something that I suspect we're going to be covering this more in days and years to come, and bring these to light. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I would agree with that. And also, you have say the Mohawk community, which straddles the border, Quebec and Ontario and Western New York, where they no longer need, or they never used to need, passports to go freely back and forth as being a First Peoples. Right.
Yeah.
That looks like that may be changing too.
Yeah, I think so. So we're going to be going back to YouTube shortly. So if you're listening right now to BTPM NPR, whether on 88.7 or listening on the live stream, you can continue this conversation with us from Canada with Dan Karpenchuk on YouTube by going to the Buffalo Toronto Public Media YouTube page. But we will be back with more. We're going to be talking a little bit more about some of Dan's reporting on air. Again, you could join us at BTPM on YouTube. And if you're just joining us, this is Dan Karpenchuk, our Canadian correspondent, and I'm SJ Velasquez, the Director of Audio Strategy. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back with more Conversations from Canada. Back on YouTube.
It doesn't stop.
No, it does not stop, right? I know, everybody. Let's check in on YouTube to see if anybody's asking anything, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that Monarch story. We've got a question. Love Dan's reporting. Have you talked about Carney's popularity in Canada now? And let me try. Sorry, I can't see the end of that question, but perhaps, Dan, you could address the first part of it. Have you talked about Carney's popularity now in Canada?
I haven't done any stories on it, but he's
and in the rest of the world, I'm hearing, is what it says.
Yeah, I think Carney is now respected, completely respected throughout the world as a real national leader, as a real as someone who has a good economic insight. In Canada, for instance, I think if there was an election held tomorrow, he would win a majority. He may get a majority anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about this, but in April there'll be 2 by-elections. We've had four opposition members cross the floor. 3 from the Conservatives, 1 from the New Democrats, have crossed the floor of the House of Commons to join the Liberals.
Really?
Right. Which leaves Carney only, I think, 2 seats short of a majority. And there are going to be 3 by-elections in April, 2 of them in Ontario, 1 in Quebec. And the 2 in Ontario are from MPs who come from ridings which are solidly Liberal.
Wow.
So it could be that he will have a by-election and come out of it with a majority government.
Well, I'm excited to see what kind of reporting comes out of that, Dan. I know we have a little bit of time now, so we're going to actually play that Monarch story from earlier that we referenced on BTPM NPR. So I think we're going to go to that as soon as it's ready.
It's a sunny midweek day in late September here at the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area. There's a brisk wind, a hint of coolness suggesting autumn is just around the corner. But the small team of researchers is undeterred. They're here to tag monarch butterflies. One of them is Tom Hasse, assistant professor in biology at Peterborough's Trent University. He says this area is ideal for monitoring and tagging monarchs because any monarchs east of Newcastle will come through here along the shoreline and eventually reach Point Pelly in southwestern Ontario before crossing Lake Erie into the U.S. and then to Mexico. Hasse says the work done tagging monarchs here and in scores of other locations in Canada and the U.S. is important.
So there's a lot of information we get by knowing where the monarchs are going. So one of the big pieces of information is the actual routes that they're taking. So if we know the routes that the monarchs are taking, then we can strategically choose those areas that we want to enhance with native wildflowers or milkweed. It also helps us know if there's problems in parts of the range that we need to be aware of.
Hasse says one of those problems that's become of increasing concern is a parasite, a protozoan called OE.
And this is a parasite that attacks the monarch caterpillar. The caterpillars, they pick it up when they're feeding on the milkweed. And it will sometimes kill the monarch during the chrysalis phase, but sometimes it'll also kill the monarch as it's emerging. They'll have twisted wings when they emerge from the chrysalis.
Emma Byers is a graduate student at Trent. She's part of the team. Her focus is testing for OE.
I found 1 case of OE so far in the 73 samples I've taken. So it's not that prevalent, which is good. We don't want it to be prevalent. So right now I'm just writing down the tag number on my slides so I can, when I go back to the lab, I can identify which butterfly was which. So I can look up pictures of how I'm taking, and we can take their size measurements and stuff.
Catching those monarchs with a net can also be a challenge. I followed Brian Reed as we pushed through tall grass as he kept watch for monarchs, net ready. Reed is a member of the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area Committee. He's been involved in the nature area for about 20 years, and with the tagging efforts since 2017. Reed successfully nets a pair of monarchs, then explains his next steps.
So we have a couple that we've just captured, and we're going to release them from the net first of all. You have to keep your net turned the right way so they don't fly out and you've lost your catch. Their feet are a little sticky, so sometimes they stick to the net itself, but it doesn't hurt to pull gently and bring them out. You see how I'm holding it, and we look inside to see whether it's male or female. And this one has the little telltale spot, which indicates that it's a male. There's another one on the opposite side. You see the little spot right there?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm now going to just hold it gently, and Leanne's going to give me the tag, which she's recorded. Thank you. I'm going to affix it to that portion of the butterfly there and just tap it gently in place, and away it goes.
Leanne Fernandez, who just assisted Reed in the tagging, is also a member of the Nature Area Committee. This is her first year as a member. She was part of a community event the week before when the public was invited to take part in tagging monarchs.
It was just awesome to see the community come together and seeing the little ones running around, trying to catch the monarchs and getting excited when they did. And there was 2 brothers that had a little competition going on, so it was like captivating to see the community and, just having a wonderful, beautiful day.
Hossey says community engagement is also important to the program. He says this year there weren't as many monarchs. Less than 50 were netted and tagged by the public. That prompted the question about the declining numbers. Hossey says assessing the data is what the organization Monarch Watch does.
But we do know that from the overwintering counts down in Mexico, in the overwintering grounds, that monarch numbers continue to decline. And we had hoped, we had seen some signs that maybe their populations were stabilizing or coming up a little bit a couple of years ago, but last year the numbers were down again. And so it's concerning, but it seems like the numbers that we're seeing in Ontario and in some of the other parts of the range are still high, which is encouraging.
Some scientists have offered several reasons for the steady decline in the monarch numbers: climate change, weather, habitat loss, pesticides, and chemicals. All that despite the efforts of groups like these at the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area and across North America. For WBFO News, I'm Dan Karpenchuk in Toronto.
Welcome back, everybody who's joining us on YouTube. You just heard Dan's reporting about monarch butterflies. And we were just talking about the significance of monarch butterflies, and we talked a little bit before in the broadcast that was also simulcast on BTPM NPR about wildlife. So we've talked about butterflies, you've written about bees, whales, water. We've talked about a lot of nature. What is it? I mean, we kind of talked about this already, but
I guess I'm a nature lover at heart.
You are.
Or an animal lover, or both. I don't know, but I particularly found the monarch butterfly story fascinating, and I got the idea to do it for BTPM.
Yeah.
Basically because it's such a binational story, and it's really it's a story about wildlife, but it's also a people story.
Right.
I mean, this is just tracking the monarchs is just a fantastic way of people to get involved with wildlife.
And we talked a little bit about how migration, especially of wildlife, it's representative of a lot of like the human experience too. We see. Sorry, I can hear folks in the back room right now. Sorry. It's so representative of just that international universality of things. And I was telling you, like growing up, my family has a little cottage in Hanford Bay, and I learned about monarch butterflies and our connection to Canada when the butterflies were migrating and a huge storm hit. And the next morning, the beach was covered in monarch butterflies. And it was just kind of symbolic of the destruction that happens when you stop migration from happening, when you stop cross-cultural interaction. It's pretty destructive. And I know we were kind of both devastated when I was, retelling that story. I kind of feel like we're also having that happen with humans. And that wall, that separation between ourselves and Canada.
Yeah. Well, this is a good example of where that wall doesn't exist. I mean,
yeah.
When they tag the butterflies on this side of the border, researchers along the migratory path of those monarchs will also see the tags, will report back. So there's a tremendous collaboration between people on both sides in just following the monarchs on their way to Mexico. So it's a great story that way. But, climate change, weather, like you were describing, what happened, a huge storm, chemicals, pesticides, loss of habitat, it's all affecting the monarchs. And researchers are saying that, the numbers are in decline.
Right.
They're not declining to the point that it needs an intervention.
Right.
Whether it can have an intervention, we don't know, but it's not that bad yet, but it continues to decline.
And in the case of like me growing up and having that big storm, obviously it was a natural event that you'd say we didn't have anything to do with that as human beings, but we do know that climate change does impact weather patterns, and there are more increasing weather anomalies that are being caused by climate change that are disrupting those patterns of migration and just wildlife in general. Mm-hmm. Are there any other kind of stories like that you foresee telling or wanting to talk about?
I think the environment is going to become a big issue in the next little while because of policies that have come out of the United States affecting trade and tariffs. Canada or Canadian politicians are putting more of an emphasis on resource development over and above the environment. So I think you're going to see, and I know some environmental activists are already concerned about this because we're trying to build more pipelines. We want to export more oil and natural gas to the Asia Pacific region. And this is all at the cost, perhaps, of the environment.
Yeah. And I know, speaking of the environment, it's 9:19. So if you're joining us on YouTube and you want to listen to Bird Note, it's on. Please listen to it. I know that I always knew I was late to work when Bird Note came on and I was in the car. So if you're joining us now on YouTube, I'm going to look at some of the questions and see if we've got any comments here, and we'll
Can I add something about the monarchs?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and a follow-up to this monarch story is I went back a year later to the area, the Samuel Wilmot Conservation Area, and I was there for the tagging event day where children were taking part in the tagging and the capturing of the butterflies. And I would encourage any Americans or American groups with kids who are interested in this to find out when the tagging events are and come up and take part.
Oh, that would be interesting. So it's an open thing. It's something that people can participate in.
It's an open thing because there won't be a tagging event on the U.S. side.
Right.
It's all on the Canadian side.
Oh,
but
interesting.
Just to be able to see the kids running around with butterfly nets, catching these, and going to the researchers with them and showing how they're tagged. You can tell whether they're male or female, and they're being tagged. I think a lot of kids.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think a lot of kids in, say, the Buffalo or Niagara
Yeah.
region on the U.S. side who are interested in what happens to the monarchs would love to take part in this.
That is amazing. Well, I just want to remind any of our viewers right now, especially the educators, I'm thinking, if we have anybody who is listening who is part of the schooling system in Western New York or Southern Ontario, this sounds like a really great opportunity. So it sounds like a potential field trip. I just want to take a moment to thank Tanika from Buffalo. Tanika called in to donate and became a member. So thank you so much, Tanika. We appreciate your support. If you'd like to support Buffalo Toronto Public Media, we would be grateful to have your support. You can go to btpm.org and there's a donate button in the top right corner. You can also do that on our Listen app. We have some questions, it looks like. We've got, let's see, Saturn Man 9 asks, do you foresee a time when we could have open borders between the U.S. and Canada as they do in Europe?
Well, we used to have open borders.
Yeah.
It was never a problem to cross the border.
When did it become a bigger issue? Do you remember?
It became a bigger issue about a year ago.
Yes. Okay.
That became a huge issue a year ago. The open borders, I don't think that it ever really, the idea of an open border like Europe, where the Schengen Treaty got rid of all the customs all the customs stations in those members of the European Union. I don't think that will happen here, but I don't think it ever had to happen here. I think the border always was fairly open. People could cross quite freely.
Right, yeah. Well, I feel like even just growing up, we were joking about this at home. We had some friends come in from the New York City area, and they come in once a year. They stay with us around Christmas for a night, and we usually take them out to dinner. We'll try to take them somewhere fun or nice or interesting. And this past Christmas, we took them to Happy Jack's, just on the other side of the Canadian border, because that was such a unique Buffalo experience. If you wanted good Chinese food, you'd have to cross over to Canada
to go to Happy Jack's
to get a sit-down meal of Chinese food in like the 80s and 90s. But as Saturn Man on YouTube also mentioned, he said Buffalo seems so much farther away from Toronto, I know from Canada in general, because of the border crossing now. Do you sense that it's just more of a slog to get over?
I do. I do. People are reluctant. I mean, Canadians used to just travel across the border to shop. I'm sure
Yes,
the malls would have, and the malls in the Buffalo and in the border states would have been just packed with Canadian license plates.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
In the parking lot.
I think plenty of our Buffalo viewers or listeners at this point are all thinking Walden Galleria because we would get Canadians coming over, and the joke among Buffalonians is the Canadians would come over, they'd have their junky clothes they didn't want, and they'd go to the mall, get all their great new gear, and they'd
Absolutely.
leave their old shopping bags full of their discarded clothing that they drove over in the parking lot. So there was even, talk about getting those old clothes and getting donation bins so that they could drop off the clothes so they didn't have to bring them back. So that is a very real thing that happened. And we're not seeing that as much right now because of that, the tension at the border.
And that was accepted by the border agencies on both sides. We know they're going there to shop. We know a lot of that's going to be worn coming back. We can't prove that it isn't theirs, right?
Right.
But it's okay.
Yeah, there are no tags on the clothing.
But now both sides are suffering. We're a lot of the prices that are Canadians have to pay are higher because they don't get those bargains from the U.S.
Right.
And because they're not shopping in the U.S., a lot of those retailers are losing money, and people are losing jobs too.
You had talked a bit earlier, and I know we talked about this yesterday as we were just chatting, how you grew up in Toronto. You're a Toronto boy from downtown Toronto. Did you have a lot of experiences coming over to Buffalo?
I did a few times. I used to come, later on when I was an older teenager, my friends and I would cross to Buffalo because it was in the United States and it was an exciting place to go.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that, and I actually have a nephew who lives in the Buffalo region.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay, so you have a pretty strong Buffalo connection.
I have
even
a
through your
strong
family.
Buffalo connection. He's been there for years. He owned a shop where they did hair replacements. So, yeah.
Interesting. So I was just hearing from Joe Canizaro in my ear. He was telling us we've got a couple minutes here, and then we're going to go back over to BTPM NPR, where we're not going to listen to a story during that time. We are going to talk about Canadian tourism and that steep drop. So this conversation, we're really going to get into the weeds later on in our last BTPM NPR break. So as we get into our next break with BTPM and NPR, that's going to be at 9:29. So we're a few minutes out. I think we're going to have some fun talking there. But let me see. What else haven't I asked you about? What are things that you've wanted to talk about? I'm sure there are things on your mind.
I think one of the things I wanted to talk about are the changes that are coming to the BTPM, and what you see in the future.
I think we're still working on a lot of the answers to that, but the good news is that we have a lot of opportunity. So speaking only on behalf of the radio stations and our audio properties, we're working out all of the specifics. We will have very, very detailed information available as soon as possible. But from my perspective, one of the challenges that has been bestowed upon me has been to come up with some programming. As you know, you may have heard BTPM NPR is going to switch over to 94.5, and classical is going to go to 88.7, and there will be some adjustments because NPR programming has to stay on a non-commercial station. So Morning Edition and All Things Considered, Wait, Don't Tell Me, your flagship NPR shows, they're going to stay on 88.7. But everything else that you love about BTPM NPR, or what a lot of people know as WBFO, is going to stay together in 94.5. We have a couple gaps that we need to fill. So I have I guess you could call it a problem, but it's actually a great opportunity to finally bring in some of the programming that we've wanted to air for so long that we didn't have a space for. We're hearing from our audience that they want On Point back. We tested bringing On Point back around the holidays. It was exceptionally popular, so we're talking to American Public Media about bringing that back because that is what our audience wants. And we've been in talks with other distributors, podcasters, news outlets about quality programming that we've never been able to air, that we can finally air. So we're bringing in some WNYC programming, more APM, American Public Media programming. We're talking to CBC about having more Canadian news and features available on air, but that will come in time. So I know Joe is telling me we've got a short amount of time until we go back to BTPM NPR. And when we go over to WBFO BTPM NPR, I want to talk about Phoebe and Jay a little bit. Okay. So anybody who's joining us on YouTube, you can also listen in on BTPM NPR in just a moment. Good morning. If you're just joining us, I am S.J. Velasquez, Director of Audio Strategy at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, and I am joined by Dan Karpenchuk, our Voice of Canada for BTPM NPR, and this is a special segment called Conversations from Canada. So we've been talking both here on BTPM NPR as well as live on the BTPM YouTube channel about Dan's career as a journalist, what Dan has been doing as a reporter for BTPM NPR, some of the other work that he's done. We talked a bit about his acting and how he got into acting. And I want to ask you about something that I just recently learned about. So not only are you a public media guy when it comes to BTPM NPR, but you have a connection to PBS as well. Could you tell us about this recent gig that you've taken on?
Yeah, a new cartoon series called Phoebe and Jay.
Can you tell us about what is Phoebe and Jay all about?
Phoebe and Jay are a couple of kids who live in a building, topsy-turvy towers, and I'm a recurring character, or my voice is a recurring character. It's an animated production, and I'm a recurring character called Mr. Gurley. And Mr. Gurley lives alone. At least I think he lives alone, because I've never had any reference to a Mrs. Gurley. So I think he lives alone, and he's almost like the friendly uncle in the building to Phoebe and Jay. And it's just a wonderful series. It was such a pleasure to be a part of that, and to be allowed to put my voice in that production. It's such a learning opportunity for little kids.
Yeah.
Where they just learn the basics about how to read the address on a parcel, how to figure out where things are, just little things.
Right. That I was trying to figure out what's special about the show. So I was doing a little bit of digging, watched a few clips, and what I learned is that it's a new animated series, and it's designed for children preschool age, 3 to 5.
Right.
And it's meant to support early literacy skills.
Yes.
So as you said, just learning how to read an address, phone numbers, parcels, understanding what the numbers mean and how those are all messages elsewhere. And I thought that was really great, because we talked a little bit about media literacy being something that we really need to push, especially right now, and literacy in general is
right.
We're seeing literacy numbers drop among young people in the United States. So this is really important, and I think if I've got my information correct, you can actually watch Phoebe and Jay on BTPM PBS as well as PBS Kids. So if you want to find out when to watch that, so if you're listening and you want to hear more from Dan and enjoy Phoebe and Jay, you can check out our listings on btpm.org for more information. So you've done quite a bit of voice acting, though. This isn't brand new.
It wasn't. Yeah, there was one scene from Phoebe and Jay in one of the episodes where they have a partial address on a parcel, and they don't know who it belongs to, and they knock on my door, and they say, there's a parcel, and it's addressed to this building on this floor. Is it you, Mr. Gurley? And I say, oh no, nobody sends me parcels anymore. So it's very heartwarming as well, the way it does. But before Phoebe and Jay, I did the latest version of the CGI version of Caillou. I played the grandpa's voice.
You did?
In Caillou.
Okay.
Caillou, which has been a popular children's program, although controversial at times, but very popular.
Okay. So public media is really part of your identity these days. Could you talk just in the next 30 seconds? Tell us a little bit about working with public media and what it has meant to you to be part of this mission.
I feel so privileged that I have been able to do
journalism and acting, the two things I love the most. I feel so privileged that my life has been full of that, and the support of my family for that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the most important thing. That
I think I can speak on behalf of all of BTPM that we feel privileged to have you, somebody who is such a talented journalist, actor. And if you want to participate in more of this conversation, we're going to be heading over to YouTube shortly to have more conversations from Canada with Dan. And you could join us at Buffalo Toronto Public Media's YouTube page. And thank you so much for listening. We'll be back shortly.
BTPM Plus. What is BTPM Plus?
Go on.
It's an evolution of Buffalo Toronto Public Media.
You have to take risk to get reward.
That brings you the best of PBS and the shows everyone is talking about.
Oh my gosh, there they are.
From a small spark, a flame has arisen, not to be extinguished.
Where you can watch your favorite programs live.
Welcome back, sir.
We're glad to be home.
And dig into collections curated just for you.
Something for everyone, if you catch my drift.
And here's the best part. When you stream BTPM Plus, you're not just watching. You're supporting your local public media station. The journalism, the arts, and the storytelling that keeps our community connected.
This is the place that people turn to for stories that matter.
Knowledge is power.
Yep, indeed.
And this is power.
BTPM Plus. Stream smarter, stream local.
Welcome back. I'm S.J. Velasquez, and we are joined here by Dan Karpenchuk for Conversations from Canada. We're in our Toronto office. which is a beautiful space. My first time here. Love being in Canada for any opportunity. But thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
My pleasure.
We've done a lot of talking. We've talked about your career. We've talked about your stories that you've written. We've talked about the U.S. border, U.S.-Canada border. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about politics, wildlife, everything. I wanted to know, and I know this is a hard question, which story throughout your career do you feel most personally proud of because of the impact it's made or any other reason?
I had time to think about that because I knew you were going to ask me about that. And I think the story that you won't know about it, but it was back in about 1991, 92. There was a lot of controversy over cod fishing. And
cod fishing, really?
Yeah. I was in Germany at the time. I was working for the Deutsche Welle, which is the German shortwave service, their English program. And I went to Portugal and talked to people in the fishing fleet, the Portuguese fishing fleet. And I also then went to a local church where I listened to the church service in Portuguese. And the whole story was about how Canada had declared a moratorium on fishing off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. And the perspective from the Portuguese side was completely different.
Yeah.
How they had been able to, at times, make money, the fishermen themselves, from fishing, from the cod fishing. And here they were, it was completely at odds with what Canada was saying. And the Canadian audience heard this for the first time. And
Really?
I'd done this for Deutsche Welle as well as for the CBC at the time. And I think that's one of the stories that I'm most proud of because it was a complete eye-opener.
Yeah, why was it the first time, do you think, that they were hearing it?
Because they had been hearing so much from the Canadian perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Fishermen in Newfoundland,
Yeah.
politicians in Ottawa, politicians in Newfoundland and on the East Coast, but not from the Portuguese side.
And we talked a little bit about that yesterday, too, the importance of having an international or a global perspective, especially for us in the United States. We all have our preferred news outlets that we go to, but it can be quite insular, and we don't really hear what the perspective is outside of the United States, or it's quite limited. So I think it's especially important for us to have your perspective, the Canada beat, having this Canada coverage, hearing what our neighbors think. I guess, could you expand on that, just your thoughts on having international perspective?
Yeah, I really found this, to be unique, how we look at things from our own point of view. It's a big deal. Everything that happens in the Niagara region is a big deal. Everything that happens in Canada is a big deal.
Yeah.
When I went to Germany and was living in Germany for 5 years, everything that happened in Canada in the Buffalo region didn't even register.
Really?
All of a sudden, you had a different global perspective on how things happen. The really important stories were really international stories.
Yes.
Right? Here, we're so used to looking at too close to what's happening, right?
Yeah.
That we forget where we are on a global perspective.
Absolutely. That's something I know we've talked a little bit about in the newsroom too. Although Canada is another country, we are neighbors.
That's right.
So we're about to head over to NPR in a second, so we'll talk in a minute. So I'm just going to take 1 second to tell everybody to head back over. Good morning. This is S.J. Velasquez, and I'm joined with Dan Karpenchuk, and we're over in Toronto having conversations from Canada. Dan, thank you so much for joining us here and for talking about the work you've done for us, for other news outlets. It's been a really tremendous opportunity to speak to you.
It's great to be here.
And we also want to thank Tamika from Buffalo, who called in to donate. If you're interested in supporting what we're doing here at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, if you value the kind of reporting that is coming from people like Dan, who provide an international perspective of what's happening not only in Buffalo, but in the United States and the world, please support us. You can join us as a member by going to btpm.org. There's a bright red donate button, I believe, in the top right-hand corner. And we also have a donor, Anonymous from Dunkirk. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Thank you so much for supporting us and for the work that we do. Going back to the work that we do at Buffalo Toronto Public Media and public media, I wanted to go back to, I guess, the heart of your role as our Canada correspondent, talking about those relationships between Southern Ontario and Western New York in particular, because we talked a bit about that invisible border, but everything, it's really all quite connected.
It completely connected. I mean, everything, all the policies that come out of Washington and come out of Ottawa will affect everything in Southern Ontario. I mean, Ontario is the most populous province in Canada, and it's got the lion's share of the industry here, the automotive sector. So much that happens in Ottawa and in Washington will affect this region especially.
And something that we're going to get to in just a second, we're going to listen to a clip that you produced for Buffalo Toronto Public Media that discusses that steep drop in tourism among Canadians coming to the U.S. So I believe that is lined up, and we're going to cut to that in just a moment.
The sweeping tariffs from President Donald Trump, as well as increased immigration enforcement and detentions, and continued rhetoric from the White House about Canada becoming the 51st state, are the main issues that grate on the nerves of many Canadians. In August, Canadian travel south by automobile was down 34% from a year ago, and air travel down 25%. While that may not be good for the tourism industry in the U.S., that's not the case north of the border. Sean McCormick is the Director of Business Development with Moneris, which tracks consumer spending trends.
Domestic tourism as a spending vehicle to drive the economy is enormous. When you think about businesses in Canada and merchants in Canada, tourism is so important to what they do.
Interprovincial spending from tourists increased almost across the board. Moira McDonald is with the Royal Roads University School of Tourism.
This is great news, and we're just very, very thankful to the Canadians who took this step, and they really talked with their actions. Well done, Canada. Well done for just behaving in a way that just really supports, who we are. We want to really support our local economies, and you saw that this year.
Meanwhile, some American businesses, hotels, and golf courses are trying to woo back Canadians with offers of perks and discounts, including taking the Canadian dollar at par, and even television ads and websites with offers for Canadians. Christy Kennedy is with the North Country Chamber of Commerce in Plattsburgh.
We have lodging properties who are offering at-par rooms or discounted room rates. We understand that there were feelings hurt, but understand the Plattsburgh and the Adirondack region value you.
But still, many Canadians aren't taking the bait.
Because of Trump, I'm not going to travel to the States, even if they offer discounts.
Discount is temporary bandage, nothing else.
One American who is taking notice is Washington's ambassador to Ottawa, Pete Hoekstra.
I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. You ran a campaign where it was anti-American, elbows up, Me Too. It was an anti-American campaign. That has continued. That's disappointing.
Hoekstra defended the tariffs on Canadian goods, saying other countries have much higher rates. It comes as Canadians continue to lose jobs, face tighter border controls, and Trump's talk of a 51st state. In addition to shunning the U.S. as a tourist destination, the Buy Canadian movement is also continuing and is expected to be fully in place in federal government spending by next spring. Details of that key policy are expected to be unveiled in Prime Minister Mark Carney's budget in November. For Buffalo Toronto Public Media, I'm Dan Karpenchuk in Toronto.
Thank you for joining us for this special program. It is Conversations from Canada with Dan Karpenchuk. Dan, our Canada correspondent, thank you so much for joining us. This is the last time we're going to be together on these airwaves during our Conversations from Canada, so I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you so much.
It's so great to be part of this.
And thank you for all the contributions that you've made to our newsroom and to our PBS Kids programming, as we've talked a little bit about as well. This has been, just phenomenal. And we just heard your story from a few months back about the drop in tourism from Canada to the U.S. You had mentioned that there was more than a 30% drop in travel by car.
Yeah, 34%.
34%?
As of August. And it changes every month. It may go up or down a point or two, but basically Canadians have stopped going to the U.S. in the numbers that they used to go.
Do you think that this is a temporary thing, or is this something that we anticipate will be long-lasting?
I think this will exist as long as the policies that are coming out of Washington exist. The talk about sovereignty, the tariffs, the tariffs are hitting Canadians and Americans on both sides of the border. The affordability is a huge issue in Canada right now, and it's as long as those policies continue, I think Canadians are going to be resentful, and one way they can get back is not to go and spend their money in the U.S. Sad to say.
Yeah, it is sad because we do love our Canadian neighbors. We want to make sure that we continue these conversations with our neighbors in Southern Ontario. So again, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for our listeners. We're going to continue this conversation on YouTube, but it's been great speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, we're back to YouTube. Let's see, do we have any other comments from anybody on YouTube? Let me see if we've got anything. I think we're hitting most of these questions. If anybody has any questions for Dan Karpenchuk, please feel free to comment on YouTube. Ask your questions. I've got my little tablet right in front of me. But until we get some more questions, I wanted to ask you, Dan, as a Canadian, what's happening in the news right now, it must feel a little bit personal. And as a journalist, you really have to remove yourself and your emotions from your reporting. Have you found that challenging, or I guess what are your thoughts when you're reporting on U.S.-Canada relations as a Canadian? Personally,
I've wanted to come to Buffalo several times over the past couple of years, but I won't travel, not now. I don't, and this is how many Canadians feel. They don't want to expose themselves by going across the border to either cell phone or laptop searches. Some have been fingerprinted, questioned at the border where, normally they would be able to drive through without a problem. Snowbirds, those Canadians who like to go south or to Arizona or to California, they're not going anymore. Some are even selling their properties in the U.S.
Really?
Yeah.
I wondered about that too.
Yeah.
Are they going elsewhere, or are they staying in Canada?
No, they're going elsewhere.
Where are they going? Are there any alternative hot spots for the snowbirds?
They're going to Europe, they're going to Portugal, they're going to Spain, they're going to Italy, they're going to Mexico. Mexico is a big draw right now.
Has that been impacted by the news and the cartel activity that's been happening recently?
I don't think so, because the cartel activity in drugs in Mexico have been in the news for a long time. People know that, and they go to areas that are safe, like Puerto Vallarta and other vacation spots.
Right.
And they're spending a lot more of their vacation money in Canada. They're being encouraged.
Yeah.
It's true. They're being encouraged by the tourism industry here in Canada, by the politicians here in Canada. Doug Ford is saying, why go to the United States, spend your vacation money here? And they are. And, the local tourist operators are benefiting from this.
We've been hearing from some folks, and I know in some of your reports you've also mentioned that some American ambassadors and politicians have felt uncomfortable by the anti-American sentiment. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you view that? Is it anti-American, or is it truly is it something else?
It's not anti-American. I mean, I don't think Canadians feel any resentment towards Americans themselves. And, people are the same. People are the same if you look along the border states and along those communities in Canada that are on the border as well. And there's not much difference. If there was not a border or a sign that says you're in this city or in that city, people wouldn't know the difference, right? The issues are the same. What they resent is basically Washington and one man in Washington, because they feel that he is directing all of the policies that are anti-Canadian, that strike at Canada.
Right.
Right? And I think that's where it is.
I feel like this is a topic that's going to continue evolving, and we'll be covering it for Buffalo Toronto Public Media, and I'm sure it's top of mind for you, for Canadians in general, Canadian media. Are there any other topics that you foresee becoming major news topics in the year ahead?
Between the two countries?
Yeah, or in general.
In general?
Yeah.
I think energy will be a big issue, especially in Canada, and that will spill over into the U.S. as well. As Canada develops more of its energy resources, like building a second pipeline or another pipeline, building liquefied natural gas plants, getting more of the Canadian resources to Asia-Pacific region, developing the minerals in the Ring of Fire in Ontario, which is that area that's mineral rich.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are going to be big stories to cover, but they're going to take a long time, and the process will be slow to get them out there.
Yeah.
To develop that will take a long time. The stories will also come slowly because the developments will come slowly.
Right. You reminded me earlier when you were talking about the actions that Canadians are taking to not come over to the U.S. You said you haven't been over to Buffalo, even though you've wanted to come over to Buffalo. It's been on your bingo card for a while. I know we've talked about getting you over to Buffalo. But it's not just Canadians that are expressing that type of concern about coming to the U.S. I've heard anecdotally and on social media, for example, that some international travelers who might be coming for, say, the World Cup, who want to come over to North America for the matches, they're now trying to not come to the United States. They're looking to come to the games in Mexico and in Canada, here in Toronto.
Our game.
So have you been hearing anything about that? Is there a larger conversation here in Canada to accommodate international travelers?
I haven't specifically heard that, but I know it's happening. And Toronto specifically is just pulling out all the stops with construction to get ready for that FIFA World Cup. I mean, and one of the things they're going to do is stop that construction when the World Cup starts.
Oh, okay.
So that not to disrupt
the
travel of pedestrians and travel of people, going to the games and just being in Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto stands to reap a huge benefit from this World Cup. The money that will be spent by tourists will be huge, just like it was for the baseball games.
Right. And I've heard from people who are trying to buy tickets or get to Toronto during the World Cup that prices right now for things are astronomical. Hotel prices are very, very, very high for the dates around the games. Have you heard anything about how Canada is responding to make sure that they can accommodate more of that tourism and that increased interest in being in Toronto during those games?
Toronto will be able to accommodate it.
Yeah.
There's enough hotels there and enough space there that I'm certain that Toronto will be okay. People may not get the hotel of choice, but
and they might have to pay a pretty penny.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the prices for hotels, and they're like thousands of dollars in some cases.
Are they?
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into too much about this. I mean, we're still what, almost 3 months away?
Yeah, we've got some time, but it's definitely on our radar. I know we're in conversation with NPR National to make sure that we have coverage of the Toronto region and not just the actual, Toronto for the games, but I believe there are like the practice facilities that are in Southern Ontario as well. So trying to determine who's located where,
right,
what the travel is going to be like, infrastructure issues, all of those things. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from Michael Moroziak in the newsroom.
And I understand Michael Moroziak is coming up to do some stories for that,
so
which will be great.
We're going to really try to do as much Canada coverage as we possibly can as Buffalo Toronto Public Media. Now, we only have a short few minutes left of our conversation. We've exhausted a lot of my questions.
We've exhausted everything.
I think so. One of the final questions that I wanted to talk to you about, this is, I have Joe talking to me. So many folks who are watching right now may not realize that Meta, the company that owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, it blocks news content in Canada. So what we post on Facebook, for example, from BTPM NPR is not visible to our Canadian audience. I was checking last night at my hotel to verify some of that. With so many North Americans citing social media as a primary source of their news. They're not seeking out legitimate news sources, but they're going to the news on Facebook, Instagram. How do we reach Canadians who might not have access to important, verified, local, national, and international news?
That's a good question.
Can we even reach them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Most people get their news from the internet, those who are at home. Others get their news in the car. I think that comes from radio stations. I mean, that's probably the most important. But how they're blocked, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think from my perspective, one of the great elements of being part of public media is that we are here to make sure that we have that news and information as objective as possible. We're all humans, but we'll try our best to identify our biases and set those aside to produce local and international, binational news from international reporters, and have that available to our audience. So we hope if you're watching right now on YouTube or listening in, I would encourage you, bookmark us, btpm.org/news. If you're able to access us on FM, we're currently at 88.7 FM. We'll be on 94.5 when we do the signal swap. But you can also stream us on our BTPM Listen app. And we really hope that you'll join us for these conversations again and that you'll listen in on Dan's reporting. Thank you so much for listening in, for joining us. And Dan, you're amazing. Thanks for your work.
My pleasure.